The most common argument for the afterlife being otherworld is that it apparently has no concept of space or time, and also that it's purely a metaphysical realm that isn't physical. Both of these premises are extremely easy to disprove, however, because the afterlife has space, time, a physical location, a set size, as well as physical matter, and is bound by dimensions, so let's start over it point by point.
Yeah, no, he was literally ratting the entire time while making this video, so yeah.
We have countless references to space in the afterlife. Here are just a few examples. Snake, Waking, Kai's Planet, and Heaven all have set length, width, and diameter, which means that they have physical measurements which require space. Heaven is explicitly compared to a physical structure in size, and King Kai's Planet is implied to be smaller than the Earth, and to have less energy than it.
This presupposes that visual or textual representation within a physical medium is ontologically true. Just because size or length is depicted within it, that doesn't mean that it's ontologically applicable. Or you can just argue for the legend portion of this argument. You could just say that a legend by definition is something which is intrinsically or inherently not true, or lacks evidential substantiation of being true, and therefore it's just going to be false.
Them, Janemba warps space to create holes in the fabric of the afterlife. In Dragon Ball Heroes, the characters note that there is space-time in the afterlife, and that they make holes in it to make rifts.
So one, that's not really good at all, since it could just be argued that Janemba created space within those abilities, and that space is an intrinsic property of those abilities, so it's going to be entailed with them by default. Not that space is intrinsic to Otherworld. You have to argue that or justify why space is external to Janemba's abilities, otherwise this argument is just going to be weak as fuck. And for the second part, for the DB Heroes part, this isn't necessitating space being an intrinsic property to Otherworld. Once again, that doesn't mean it's an intrinsic property to Otherworld.
Noted to have space like that of the living universe, and that it has a circumference, a physical measurement, even though it isn't.
Yeah, once again, same issue. Depiction doesn't equate to ontology. I can depict something within length, that doesn't mean it's ontologically true.
Goku moves in the afterlife, which requires space, since moving is the act of changing your position from one point of space to another.
The definition of causality demonstrates that in a fictional narrative or a fictional setting, we can make movement metaphysically prior to the notions of space and time as an abstraction which is completely disconnected from our model of movement. Because in our model, in our real model, movement actually necessitates space-time, but this same thing doesn't have to be intrinsic to fictional states of affairs. I mean, like, my nigga, fiction is literally false events, and plus we can conceive some types of contradictions in fiction as long as they aren't propositional. Like, we can conceive a character moving in a place that is devoid of all temporality. Obviously, that's going to be contradictory, especially to our non-logical laws, but we can conceive this in fiction, since fiction is a conceived idea, and we can conceive contradictions like these, since the story is abstract, our ideas are abstract. Like, this is even why outer versal structures can be affected in the first place. That in of itself is contradictory. Like, by this same logic, no character in fiction can affect an outer versal structure by warping it, etc., etc. That in of itself is a change in time, is a measure of change. But the thing is, we can have abstract causality, or something that is metaphysically prior to the notions of space and time.
Afterlife having a set size is that the Kaioshin realm is noted to be 10% of the combined size of the afterlife and the mortal universe's space. Examples of physical matter existing in the afterlife include Goku and others being able to enter it with their physical bodies and clothing. There is food and water in the afterlife, both being physical things. There are planets, a star, buildings, trees, and quads in the afterlife. Again, all of these are physical things. Janemba is noted to have a physical body. Examples of the afterlife being bound by dimensions. Afterlife
Alright, so that's just going to be non-physical interaction, and that's just going to be an equal interpretation to take, unless you want to justify why it's more probable for the afterlife to be physical, then go ahead, but this is an equal interpretation, and if you want to say why that this is impossible, or that this is completely contradictory, and we can't have this, or we can't conceive this, then there's no point in using this ratty-ass argument.
life exists inside the macrocosm, which exists inside the neutral space, both being physical space.
It's not actually internal to the macrocosm or to the actual space. That doesn't mean it's intrinsic to it. Once again, same fucking issue. It can still reside within the macrocosm, but it's not connected with the spatial temporal realms or the space-time within it. Because the macrocosm does contain realms that lack spatial temporality.
Time travel affects the afterlife and creates new afterlives when the timeline splits.
Stop fucking writing key. Holy shit. Dragon Ball timelines are deviated from conventional timelines. They aren't just timelines in the sense of being temporal. You know that. The split only happens when it is necessary, and it not splitting would be a logical problem. That's just going to be a propositional contradiction. Goku died in one timeline as an example, and in the Tiger he doesn't. The timeline splits due to the fact that Goku being and not being in the afterlife is simultaneously isn't possible.
Gravity, which requires space and time. Now let's move on to some of the many references of time in the afterlife. Goku needs time to cross Snake Way. Goku also goes to train with King Kai for 5 months. Gregory moves at supersonic speeds, which requires time, and we also see King Kai measure their speed using a watch. Fusion time quite literally runs out multiple times in the afterlife, which requires time to pass, since fusion lasts 30 minutes. There is linear progression in the afterlife, and in a world with no time, everything will be at once and there won't be any change or linear progression. Let's note that earlier space-time exists.
Gravity in fiction doesn't have to function according to our space-time model unless you can justify why our physical laws are intrinsically necessary in that fictional context. Like I already explained the shit in text. That assumption literally collapses as fiction is a construct of conceivability, not actuality, and conceivability doesn't guarantee metaphysical possibility.
And him going at supersonic speeds can just be an analogical statement, not an ontological statement, because that can just be a comment on how fast he's going within the fictional setting that he resides within. And we all know that the narrative is abstract. It's literally a conceived idea. Once again, fiction is conceivability.
My gosh, and you're genuinely asked, that first scan was literally talking about the living world's temporal flow, not the other world. The other world doesn't even have a temporal flow, by the way. And it's really fucking clear because they're talking about when the Saiyans who reside within the living world are about to arrive on Earth. So that's definitely talking about the living world.
And for these last 2 points, you're mistaking narrative language for ontological evidence. Statements like "you're really fast" or "this is really wrong" don't improve the existence of space-time. They're linguistic conveniences, not metaphysical affirmations. Fiction uses familiar descriptors so the audience can conceptually relate to what's happening.
And scales beyond it. So let's get over all the scans that people use to claim that the afterlife has no space or time. Number 1, Goku says that you don't have time in the afterlife, hence Super Saiyan 3 is easier to use there. Number 2, the CG talks about the same thing, mentioning that in the afterlife. Number 4, Kuyama said it, which he didn't. Number 1 and 2, Goku is talking about lifespans and the time he had left on Earth, not that the afterlife has no time. Super Saiyan 3 uses too much energy and thus it shortens his lifespan, thus it's easier to use it in the afterlife, where he is immortal. Since the data book is talking about the same thing and is specifically referring to this very statement, this means that the context is the same. There is absolutely no evidence that this statement refers to the Platonic concept of time, as opposed to it simply referring to how from Goku's point of view time doesn't matter.
But this is literally directly saying, this is directly Goku making a metaphysical claim, right? In this game, Goku's indirectly saying the other will last temporality. The deductive reasoning is like pretty fucking clear. He's saying time exists in the living world, and that's why he's exhausted. But in the other world, the same problem doesn't apply. Since time existing in the living world is true, and this would inherently mean that he gets exhausted there. And since he doesn't get exhausted in the afterlife, then it wouldn't entail time. He's opposing the living world with the other world.
This idea of something. Concept does not automatically entail a Platonic existence. An example directly.
Goku is not talking about a whole different new concept of time though. He's not talking about the concept of time that is subjective to him. He's literally talking about the concept of time. That's why the super exciting guy addresses what he's saying as the concept of time, not just a concept of time to him subjectively.
Despite having died and having been to King Yama's place, and he claims those are not the same things. So this implies the spiritual in Dragon Ball is actually vastly different from the spiritual in tradition. This is seen in multiple instances, such as ghosts having late in Dragon Ball, ghosts being able to fall on the ground and take damage from it. We also see that ghosts in Dragon Ball don't drift off in space when they're on Earth, despite them being stationary, which requires gravity to affect them and to keep them locked to the planet. The fact that they can be seen also requires photons to interact with them and bounce off them, further showing that the spiritual in Dragon Ball is subject to the physical even
And Trunks says that's not the same thing. He can be saying that in retrospect to the point where he's scared of ghosts, not that ghosts can't be non-physical.
Also, no, like, spiritual things are abstract by necessity, so they are going to be non-physical by default anyways. So, you can't try deviate a spiritual in Dragon Ball and spiritual within our realm. Like, you can't deviate that. You can deviate some types of things that go by our non-logical laws, and we can contradict them within fiction, since we don't have to necessitate metaphysical possibility, right? You made the same mistake, by the way. The ghost being late doesn't have to be them being late temporally or within a spatial temporal realm. It doesn't necessitate space-time. They can just be for the audience to conceptually relate to what's happening, not that they are actually late within a physical medium or substrate. Everything else he said was either him repeating himself or addressing arguments people like to use to defend Outerverse or Otherworld, and I don't think I need to address any of that because I already responded and refuted all these ratty-ass arguments. And here's an outerversal scale for Otherworld. So for all x, if x is absent of any physical property, which in this case is Otherworld, right? So x equals Otherworld, then it is not a number of dimensionality. And if Otherworld is not a number of dimensionality, then Otherworld will either exist as a mental idea or independently. So suppose Otherworld exists independently, right? If it exists independently, then it is not a mental idea. If it does exist independently, then it is not limited to any physical structure. If it is not limited to any physical structure, then it is beyond any dimensions, any possible dimensions, and anything beyond any possible dimensions is outerversal. And the second exhibit for outerversal Otherworld is just going to be P1. Outerversal is defined as something that is unlimited by dimensional predicates. Premise 2, anything that lacks spatial temporal property is not a member of dimensionality. And the reason that's analytical is because if something is a member of dimensionality, then it would entail spatial temporal properties. And opposing to this would just mean that it lacks spatial temporal properties. And then premise 3, anything that is not a member of dimensionality is unlimited by dimensional predicates. And the reason that's analytical is because if something does not belong to the set of dimensional things characterized by the measurable dimensions such as size, length, time, etc., the dimensional predicates like, let's say, like something that's fast or like long, etc., in the state of affairs to our reality cannot limit or apply to it. Being limited in dimensional predicates or being limited by dimensional predicates just means that something's properties can be described in terms of dimensions. And yeah, like that's literally it. That's all the debunk was. It wasn't that hard. It wasn't that simple. It was just absolutely fucking mid. This outerversal Otherworld topic is boring as fuck. I recommend like you debating something else. Technical fiction is probably going to make you lose like half of your knowledge. But yeah.